futuristic, discipline, learner, focus, and achiever. My name is Chad Peterman, and I'm the president at Peterman Brothers. My biggest aha moment about learning my strengths was understanding that my strengths will be leveraged. However, understanding where I may be weak is important when leading others.
I'm Darren Verasami.
I'm Brandon Miller,
And this is The Strengths Whisperer.
the show empowering leaders to create, build, and sustain great places to work.
On this episode, we have Chad Peterman, the president of Peterman HVAC, joining us. Chad, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to dig into what you guys uncovered about me and hopefully help some people along the way.
That's always our goal. Now, before we get into talking about Peterman HVAC and how you're building the culture there that will outlast you, we're going to talk about you. And in preparation for today's conversation with Brandon and I, we actually had you take the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment. Now, with that, Brandon, I want to invite you to just remind our audience why we had Chad take the assessment.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Chad and I met through a mutual connection and introduction and got to talking about his business and some of what he's working on there. And we're really excited to share with you his forward thinking in the industry that he serves, as well as just how he's growing a very healthy forward thinking culture. And so the StrengthsFinder, or Clifton Strengths as it is more commonly referred to now, is an assessment that many leaders inside of organizations leverage to understand their unique strengths and then how to build a strengths-based culture with it. So the tool is used for personal and professional development as well as organizational development. And so inviting Chad to learn about his strengths, he was nice enough to join along. And so we're here today to take a look at what makes Chad awesome at what he does.
Right before we dive into his results and explore that, I think Chad's backstory is pretty phenomenal. We'll talk a little bit more about it later in the episode, but he was employee number 21 in a company that his dad founded. And obviously by the name Peterman HVAC, Chad, you're in a company that's within the trades, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what's fascinating is you came up under a dad that was in the trades, and you didn't really get into doing the work of the trades. Your focus was always on leading people around you that have the knowledge to do the thing. So that was kind of in your DNA from early on in your career, and now that's magnified as you've stepped more into your role here as president. Before we dive into that, let's jump into your strengths. Brandon, is there anything that's unique about Chad's strengths that stood out? And then we'll get into what resonated with Chad.
Chad's number one strength is futuristic. Number two, discipline. Number three, learner. Then he's a focus and he's an achiever. And Chad, just real quick on those top five, just wanted to ask, how did they connect with you when you took a quick read of them?
Taking the assessment, much like any assessment, is always good to do just to kind of recalibrate and understand what you need to be focused on and where you're good at. And so to me, where it really resonated was kind of that future thinking. I think that is so important from a leadership role. Oftentimes, I talk to people that are struggling, and my first question to them is, do your people know where they're going? And oftentimes their response is like, well, what do you mean? Yeah, well, actually, now that I think about it, I'm not sure that they know. And it was a lesson we learned back in 2016 when my brother and I were taking the reins of the company. And it was, hey, we have all these grand ideas in our head, but we probably ought to share them with everybody else so that they know where we're heading and can help us get there, as opposed to just fighting the fires of today. And it gives them a why behind why they are fighting the fires of today, because we're going, hopefully, as a team to a better place.
You're describing the futuristic strength very well. And being that it's your number one, we like to refer to this as the visionary strength. So the one where you can get out, you can look ahead, you can forecast, you can imagine possibilities, you can stay in a space of just whether it's way far out or tomorrow, what's the next path? What's the next plan? So I imagine that part of your role as president and leader of the company is you're setting the vision for growth. Would that be right?
Absolutely. And one thing I'll point out, and you guys may get to this, the visionary, and if that is one of your strengths, I think the other strength is realizing you may not be an integrator and just self awareness. I can tell you that when I played both roles early on, there was growth, but there was also a lot of loose ends and different things like that because I was always thinking for the future and not always, hey, we maybe want to monitor that process to make sure that it's fulfilled. And where we really took off 2020, 2021 is when I kind of identified that and I moved out. And my brother and one of our other leaders who's been with us for quite a long time took the reins of that. And that's their strength, the integration piece. And those two working side by side. Obviously, when you're smaller, you got to do both, right? But it's kind of having that awareness to when you reach that certain point is to let off the reins of the day to day and then use your strengths to continue to propel the company forward.
Chad, picking up on what you just said, one of the things that stood out to me from the point that you just made and the fact that 3 of your top 5 are very strong executing strengths: focus, achiever, and discipline. And yet you lead with this futuristic, this ability to be the visionary. Was it a challenge for you to, as you've grown in your role in leading the company, to step into the role of being the visionary and not being that day-to-day execution person, like getting to the goal of staying out of the execution of the business and actually staying in the visionary role? What was that journey like for you in your leadership growth?
So that's a great point and something that I think probably a lot of leaders go through as their company scales and something I went through as well. It's hard to give up control, especially when you've had it. And it's, hey, are we doing things my way and so on. And I heard a mentor of mine say the other day, I was listening to a podcast that he was on, and he said, my job as a leader is to create an open field for my leaders to run in and do great things. And for me, it goes back to what I said prior of the self-awareness. And I think as leaders, where I see people struggle is those people who are unaware of how they come off to people. Being a visionary can be very frustrating to a lot of people in your organization because you're always thinking about the next thing. You're always moving fast. You always have ideas. You're always doing this thing. But the fact of the matter is that there are very few visionaries within the company. In fact, sometimes there may just be one. And so you may be on an island. And so understanding how you come off to people and how removing yourself from the integration piece may actually catapult them into making decisions and solving problems. And they may not do it exactly how you would have done it, but them doing those things allows you to do your thing of being that visionary. And as it relates to communicating with integrators, I just had this conversation with my brother. I'm excited. I'm calling him. I'm like, can you believe this? We're going to do this and this and that and this. And he's like, hold on, I need to see this. And so I literally had to put together some like documents and like then show him. And then once I showed him, he was like, okay, perfect. Yeah, we can do that. No problem. I got it. So that's something that we battle back and forth with in a good way of just understanding how you come off in the world and especially in your organization.
Most visionaries are very good at painting the picture, gaining buy-in, showing where we could go. But one of the challenges of futuristic as a strength is that people can find themselves in that space that you just described. Whoa, slow down. Where are you going? We're right here. We still have today. And we like to say that some visionaries can paint the picture of Neverland. Looking over there, see where we're going. Third star till morning. But your strengths are unique in that you have a grounded visionary strength. You're combining that futuristic ability, which is not actually a very common top 5 strength in all of the 28 million people who've taken this assessment online. It's actually more of a middle strength, but in business leaders, it pops to the top. Yours is more grounded though, because with discipline, focus, and achiever, a way to think about that is you have the structure capability that the discipline has. So you mentioned integrator. Every business needs a visionary and an integrator. you can dual role, which is unique. You have the ability to be the visionary and be the integrator, because when you get to focus, that's your goal orientation. So I imagine for you, your mind works in terms of point-to-point outcomes. What's the next thing? How do we eliminate the distractions to get to the thing? And then how do we then build off of that thing to the next thing? Would that be accurate for you, Chad?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you said kind of visionary. Yeah, I probably get on people's nerves. There's no doubt. But what I've always tried to do is try to paint a vision that I think they'll be comfortable with. Now, we want to push to discomfort, don't get me wrong, and stretch ourselves and grow and learn, but there's always a vision of, I always talk about it. There's my plan that I roll out to the team of here's where we want to go, and that's along the path, but I know that with the people that we have, they're going to far exceed that. So I'm able to paint kind of my own pie in the sky vision that we'll get to eventually. They always joke, hey, this is the budget number, but I'm sure you have a number in your head. I was like, well, yes, I do, but there's a time and a place. So let's shoot for this, and I'm sure that we'll exceed it, moving forward. But yeah, it's moving from one thing to the other, understanding there's got to be a process and procedure and all of those things that are important. So you have to be there to support those integrators in that. If your vision is to take this process and roll it out in 3 months, but you're getting feedback from your integrator saying, hey, it's going to take another month, that's the time to say, yeah, absolutely. Where can I help? Is there anything I can do? Or do I just need to keep supporting you there? Is there any roadblocks I can remove so that you could get there? From my experience, there's no initiatives that are really life or death. It's just a wish that we get it done at this particular time. And so if you can be there to support those integrators, I think that's the other key piece of the visionary, is supporting those people who are actually going to carry it out rather than just be there with, hey guys, come on, let's get there. And that's where I think I kind of got an unfair advantage coming into the trades, having no trade experience, because I knew from day one I had to lean on others because I didn't know how to do what it was that we were actually doing on a day-to-day basis. And so supporting those people, I think, was an early kind of education into what I was going to need to be as we got bigger.
Darren, can you hear his learner coming through super strong?
I can feel his learner coming through. Many people might not know this about me, but before starting 34 Strong with Brandon, I spent 10 years in construction. And Chad, when we talked originally, that was something that we had in common. Both of us did not come from the trades to move into the people leadership roles, but really understood the essence of leaning on the experts and allowing their ideas to flow and creating a pathway. And I just want to reiterate the quote that I'm going to paraphrase here that Chad said, because I think it's so powerful. My job as a leader is to create open fields and let people run and do great things. And when we listen to what Chad just talked about there with how that discipline plays, how that focus plays, and how that learner just goes after digging in, connecting, soaking things up from other experts, it creates trust. It helps to build trust, and it helps to empower people in what they're doing. And I think you just articulated that incredibly well, Chad.
Yeah, I want to mention that each of these strengths, Chad, some of them are core to us. So they're going to be so deeply embedded because they're just a part of our genetic coding. Others are growth. There are things we've picked up along the way and we've made them our own. So they've become just as strong as those core strengths. And some are learned behaviors. These are strengths that we use and give back, they jostle around. But at the same time, the fourth kind of quote unquote strength we measure would be weaknesses, or areas where you have to watch out, or shadow sides to each of these. And something you've said that's really fascinating when you describe the talk with your brother. And I think you mentioned he's your younger brother. Is that right?
Yep, 3 years younger.
And, every now and then older brothers have this mindset about younger brothers that maybe I know a little more than you. Maybe I'm ahead of you.
We're correct about it. I'm fairly certain.
That's right. That's right. So being a high discipline, one of the challenges of discipline, and it's a strength and a shadow, discipline is described as your world is ordered by the structure you create. And when people jostle with your order, that can be challenging to someone with that strength. And at times they can find themselves dug in. I wonder if you could tell us about a time where you knew you were dug in, you knew you needed to stop being dug in, and how you may have caught that, if that's ever been a part of just your journey as a leader. have you had to work through that in your tenure thus far?
That's a great point. The one thing that I would touch on is in leadership, you have to be okay with it not being your way. And I'm a on the disc profile, kind of like a high C, like I know where that's going and all of that stuff. And it's just not trying to fix everything, because at the end of the day, I think the most important thing, and we talked about this earlier with the visionary piece, is know where you're going. And if it's going to get us closer to where we're going, then that's okay. It's not going to be perfect. There's always going to be things to fix. But at the end of the day, as long as we're doing it in accordance with our values and continuing to move it forward, I think we're in a good place. And the one thing that I always dwell on, and I always tell people, we use the disc profile here when people come on board, just have a big chart. And the one thing as it relates to discipline and being able to understand how it may come off is we're so quick to celebrate, just in the same thing with the strength finders. We're so quick to celebrate what we're really good at. But in my mind, what we really need to do is be focused on where we're not so good and where that could cause a ripple effect of issues with the people that we lead. And so it's really not so much, you're going to lean into your strengths, no doubt. But I think you also have to lean into those weaknesses or where you may not be as strong in order to understand. And I do this often. I'm going to come out and say, hey, I'm not great at this. I know you are. Where can I help you move forward? So that you don't come across as the person like, well, he's never going to get anything done because he's big thinking and this is a small process, and different things like that, I think lend itself to moving the organization forward as far as just knowing who you are, how you come off. It's perfectly fine, but you also have to know that everybody else too is perfect the way they are. You as a leader are in charge of making sure, motivating, supporting them in the way that they need to be motivated and supported.
That is such an important point that you just made. I just want all the listeners to take that in. To focus on our strengths and to really shine in them, we have to actually acknowledge our areas of weakness. We don't just sit there and sugarcoat over the areas where we have gaps. One of the terms that comes to mind that we've talked about for years is what's called confident vulnerability, where we're confident in where we shine and we're confident in our blind spots, meaning we are confident in owning those gap areas. And guess what that does for teams? It moves them from that place of what you just talked about, Chad, of self-awareness to team awareness. Because when we understand not only our gaps, but each other's gaps, a lot of times those strengths intermingle. Where you're strong, I might be weak, and you can overflow into that and provide what you can do that I can't do well, and vice versa in those areas. So it creates the openings for that team to really thrive. And it's such a key part of the strengths-based process. And as Brandon had mentioned, the shadow side, when we're talking about discipline, our strengths can be our greatest assets and our greatest liabilities. But we have to own the good, the bad, and the ugly and work to calibrate them as best as we can individually and collectively within the team.
I want to hit on, Chad, you made a comment. You said you have to be okay with it not being your way. And truer words are rarely spoken, because as a leader, you just touched on the nerve that people first leaders, people who think about growing an organization beyond themselves and empowering people to grow in their leadership with all of the messiness and all of the chaos surrounding that and all of their uniqueness that they bring, because they can't be us, right? They got to be themselves. I do want to bring that down to two of your strengths that can at times especially be challenged by people you work with. And that is your number 5 and your number 6. So your number 5 is achiever and your number 6 is competition. And to describe those, achiever, it's the most common strength among all 34. So about a third of people who take this assessment show up with achiever in their top 5. And that is all about your work ethic, your drive, your endurance, sustainability. When you say you're going to do something, Chad, I imagine you're probably good for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's going to be in your personal space, in your professional space. And competition adds fuel to that achiever endurance, fuel to that need to feel accomplished, need to get things done. And competitors, frankly speaking, we like to win. I happen to share those two in my top 10, achiever and competition, and I'm pretty much aware of the score most of the time if I'm competing, whether that's in the market or playing basketball with my sons. Now, some leaders with those two, though, one of the challenges they run into is they prefer to work with people who also have strong work ethics. They prefer to be around people who have that drive, and they can feel challenged by those that they start to perceive, you're not cutting it, you're not stepping up, you're not getting it done. Have you by chance had to face a little bit of that music as you've come along in your leadership and realized, yeah, there's times where certain personality types can get under my skin a bit?
I think early on, yes. The one thing that has really helped me in, yes, achiever, competition, I played sports all my life. Like, yeah, I want to win. I want to be the best. But I think it's important for leaders to understand that, one, not everybody's wired like that, even though the vast majority of people are. For me, it's using those two strengths not to demand out of people, and this may come as a controversial statement, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's what I believe. But it's not to demand high achievers in competition that people need to exhibit those. To me, I use those two as a means to set an example. And this is who I'm going to be, and we're going to achieve this together. And I'm going to lead the charge because I'm getting up early. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. We're going to hit this goal. We're going to do it, and we're going to do it together. Now, I feel like sometimes leaders and people can run organizations in all different capacities. I have friends that are high achievers and that's all they hire and that's what we're going to do. And I've just not been one to like, I think it takes a group of people that have all kinds of different skills. Yeah, there's people that achievement and competition are not at the forefront, but guess what? They can be really good so long as we get them in the right role. Now, we probably don't want someone who's not achiever in competition and sales, but they may be a phenomenal customer service representative. They may be a phenomenal manager. Who knows where that fits in your organization? So I use those two and try to not demand it out of people. Yeah, I'm going to promote it. Hey, we want to win. We want to hit our goals. We want to do all of that stuff. But one, if we don't, it's not the end of the world. We probably just have some things to work on. And two, not everybody's going to have that. And in being in the trades, I think is one of those where like plumbers and HVAC technicians don't grow on trees. So if you're really hell bent on trying to find a bunch of them that have competition and achiever in their blood, you may have a very small department. Whereas I think our fuel for growth is being accepting of all people's strength makeups as they come. And then it's about the manager sitting down one on one and understanding, hey, what motivates you? Well, maybe it's time off. Well, hey, if you sell your first call, you can be home really early and hang out with your family. Okay, well, that makes sense. They're not trying to be at the top of the leaderboard, but they have other things that motivate them.
I got to tell you that answer was for an achiever competition, and I'm sitting over here taking notes, listening to one that you got a good handle on that. And I want to just call out your number 7. You have relator in your top strengths, and something relators do is that they really find points of connection with others. And your comment where you said, when you think about plumbing and electrical contractors and HVAC, so electricians and plumbers and these techs, you're right. There's a need for them. And I imagine in your context, in your neck of the woods, you might savor them when you find them, recognize the importance. And that was such a great response because as a relator, I think you probably are looking for those when you get to talk to folks, when you get to build connection, you're looking for ways to relate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a good story or a prime example of that is tomorrow, actually, I'm having a sit down with our plumbing manager and myself with a group of plumbers because we rolled out a new process as we get bigger, tracking really their driving and making sure they're safe out on the roads and they're not going to cause any accidents. And yeah, it could be viewed by those guys who may have come from a company that never did that as, big brother looking over my shoulder. And so to me, as being a relator, it's, hey, sitting down and leveling with these guys. Hey, what are your thoughts on this? Like, I get it. Driving the speed limit is tough sometimes when everybody's flying by you and you're driving the speed limit. But here's why we're doing it. Is there something we could change that may make it easier? And those are one of the things, too, that I think as you grow, your message can get muffled. When you're trying to do something good, it may come off as people are going to interpret it differently. And so it's being able to take a step back rather than going, oh my God, I can't believe these people, like, so silly. I don't understand why they can't do this. It's like just leveling with them and saying, hey, what's the issue that you have and how can we make it better together? There may be a better way to do it. I don't know. We just threw this on the wall and went with it. So, from your perspective, what do you think? And so that's really, I mean, honestly, that is what I do a lot. Is, hey, let's get in these situations. My plumbing manager came to me and was like, hey, there's some rumblings, and I'm like, well, let's just sit down with them and talk to them. Let's figure it out.
So, Chad, on the heels of what you've talked about, we're starting to talk a bit more about Peterman culture and what's taking place there. From the example you just gave, repetition is clearly an important part of culture, right? I always say this: you can't go to the gym on the 3rd of January, work out for 8 hours, and eat healthy on the 3rd of January and say, I'm good for the rest of the year to be healthy. And I know you've mentioned in our pregame conversation before we got on the call just about the importance of repetition in culture. And I think what you just talked about was a great example of that. In your industry, culture is often not necessarily a primary focus. In an industry, though, that requires very specific skill trades, should it be more of a focus? And how do you feel like Peterman has been changing that narrative about culture and the employee experience moving forward?
Culture is an activity. It's more a verb than a noun in my mind, because to me, culture is a living piece of the company. And it has to be, especially from the leader's seat, it has to be pushed out there all the time. You have to be setting the example and doing the things that people relate to. And it's not just a slogan on the wall. It's, oh, he's really passionate about this. Like, this is the way that this thing is going to be done. I talked to a gentleman who runs a company out in Virginia earlier today, and we were talking about, his question to me was, tell me about this leadership thing and how you did it. And I go, well, I kind of stumbled upon it, but the biggest thing that I learned is that it's not about teaching people how to be better leaders all the time. It's more so just setting the culture of, hey, we're growing, we're trying to get better. We're going to get into some uncomfortable situations, but that's okay because we're all here to support each other, and just pushing out that narrative that's going to wrap your company and be that place where when you ask people why they like working here, oftentimes they can't really tell you. Well, I mean, I like this, I like that, but they're very superficial things where at the end of the day, it's my belief that the underpinning of why they like to be here is the culture and the actions of our leadership team, on down to a helper on an install team wanting to help somebody or wanting to make the place better. And to me, that's the key of scaling a company, is just understanding that you're there to support people and that it's your job. I always say, when people ask me what my job is, I'm just here to be a cheerleader and I remove obstacles out of the way. I just want to tell people they're doing a great job and find people who are excelling and support them however I can.
Can we just repeat that comment? Culture is a verb. That was a really good nugget for our listeners, because we can get caught on culture as this thing. It's a person, place, or thing. It's a thing, right? It's something that sits over there. And what you just described is culture's alive. Culture flows. And that is so important, because that means it has the ability to go in a positive direction, but it also has the ability to go in a negative direction. And it sounds like you're keeping your hands on the wheel, Chad, to keep moving it in a positive direction as much as you can influence it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We often say this. I've said it before. I'll say it again. You can have culture by intention and design, or by accident. So choose wisely. And Chad, it definitely sounds like you're choosing wisely. I think what's interesting in your story, to give our listeners some context, is your dad's story. Your dad was the founder of the company. He still wears that hat, but he is actively retired as a founder and transitioned that over to you to be the leader of the company. Did that play into your culture of today, of how that was modeled, how that leadership transition, that handoff to you was handled?
My dad is an integrator in the truest sense. He is The visionary piece is something that we still to this day struggle to communicate on because he's in the here and now and dealing with things. But the piece of the puzzle where I will always say is where I was empowered was in the transition. I always joke that my dad's never told me no in business for whatever reason. And early on, I was a 20 something that thought he was going to take over the world. And, that could be frustrating for someone who's spent their life building this company. And then you got this young kid coming in, even though he is your son, coming in saying, "Oh, we're going to take over the world. This is going to be the greatest thing ever." And what he did there is what I try to do for everybody on our team, is exactly what he did. So when you talk about that transition and what he believed in being alive, I think it is more alive than anything. And I think ultimately, while he would never take credit for it, and he has been fairly removed from the company to a certain extent, I would tell you that he started that fire by empowering myself and my brother and other people on our team to go do stuff and to lead and to make mistakes and all of that. And I don't know that he knew that he was doing it. And I don't know that I knew that he was doing it. But as I've went on my leadership journey and uncovered things, I look back and go, oh my, that's why I do it, because someone gave me the opportunity to do it. And now I want to give that opportunity to everybody that I come in contact with, as far as being able to go out there and, he created that open field for me, and I want to hopefully create it for everybody on our team.
I love how you're tying that back to your quote from earlier in the episode. Chad, you've given our listeners so much to think about here. One point out of many that I want to come back to and revisit is you talked about the importance here of the manager sitting down and figuring out what motivates people and the fact that it's different for everybody. Do you have any questions or any techniques that your managers have used or anything within your culture? I know you have different manager training programs. You have different academies that you put your people through, but do you have any insights that you could share for a listener to figure out how to uncover what motivates people differently on an individual level that would be applicable?
We're always learning. We're always trying different things. And if someone's going to reveal something to you, you have to create a level of trust and a level of understanding that you deeply care about that person and their well-being. So many organizations I see, and Darren, you pointed out, the trades is not one where culture and personal development and all that stuff is looked at super fondly. It's get the work done today and then move on to tomorrow and get the work done tomorrow. And so to me, for our managers, there's one in particular manager I'm thinking of right now, and he may not know the numbers the best. He may not know the sales side of things. There's a lot of things he still has to learn, but he is a fantastic manager, and his people buy into what he's doing because they know that at the drop of a hat, it's not going to be figure it out. It's I'm getting in my truck. I'll be out there in 15 minutes. And to me, that's where people, when they see that, especially when they've come from maybe organizations where that wasn't the case and they were left out on an island, know that at the drop of a hat, my manager is going to come out and get in the trenches with me and help me figure it out and show me how to do it. That is, to me, the first step. Anybody who's not willing to do that is going to have a very tough time uncovering what motivates somebody. And then on the flip side, motivating them once they find out, motivating them to a better performance or improvement or whatever it looks like.
Thanks for sharing that. Brandon, I don't know about you, but I have pages full of notes and insights from what Chad just said. I'm blown away in the past 40 minutes of our conversation, all that he has shared with us. Do you have any one insight that really pops out to you?
Chad, I can hear the legacy of your dad coming through in your leadership, the trust that he has instilled in you, and the trust that you're giving to your leaders, your younger brother, the managers that you're describing, the leader of the team of plumbers coming in to share something that's on their mind, and you opening the door and saying, let's talk it out. Let's get eyeball to eyeball and make this happen. And just to commend you that you're heading into the wind into the challenges. You're not waiting for them to endure, which is an absolute mark of that achiever competition with that driving strength of discipline. We didn't even get into significance and how amazing that is for driving the culture that you're describing. But Darren, I could really hear in Chad the legacy piece. And Chad, just because you are a visionary, is this the sort of business that you see going another 37 years? Is this something that you have vision for well beyond where you see it today?
Absolutely. It's amazing the calls that I was on today and how they've kind of led to examples for our chat today. But I was on one earlier and we were talking about the growth of the company and really looking at org charts and different things like that. And the one thing that came out of that was with our growth comes opportunity for those looking to move up and do different things and take on more responsibility. And as I formatted this org chart, it was like, oh my gosh, there's an opportunity. And as we get bigger, there's an opportunity and there's an opportunity. And I think that, yes, this business, because of the foundation that we've established, I believe, and the culture that we have, can go on forever and ever. At the end of the day, the key is providing opportunity for people that are willing to work on themselves and continue to grow. And to me, that's, again, being a visionary is not just about painting a picture, but understanding why you're painting that picture. And for me, it's not about just getting bigger for bigger's sake. It's getting bigger to provide opportunity and the chance to get better at what we do.
Chad, if people would like to learn more about you or connect with you, where would they go?
Big on LinkedIn. It's under Chad M as in man, Peterman. Feel free to reach out. More than happy to help out. We post our content on there as well. And we also talk about leadership on a podcast that we have. It's called Can't Stop the Growth. You can find it on all the podcast listening services. And that's where we talk about the very same thing that we talked about and the thing that you guys are passionate about as well.
Chad, with that, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. You've truly embodied what it means to be a people-first leader and somebody that has figured out how to calibrate their strengths in terms of owning the good sides of them and those watch-outs and how to manage around that. That's truly what it means to play to our strengths. We can't just play all towards the strength side, not acknowledge the gap areas. That's how we create incredibly powerful teams. And I'm excited to see what this means for your organization moving forward in terms of the employees that you attract, the culture that you build, and the impact that you continue to have in developing people. For our listeners out there, are you ready to discover your strengths to accelerate into life like Chad has? We believe in this path so much that we're offering our listeners the opportunity to discover their top 5 Clifton strengths. Email us at brandon@34strong.com with the subject line top 5 to request your StrengthsFinder code.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Strengths Whisperer. What did you take away from our conversation with Chad? We'd love to know. Just email us at brandon@34strong.com. Again, if you are ready to discover your strengths and include the word top and the number 5 in the subject line.